Hey, do we get so weird about talking about how old we are? Um, some of us don't want to say that we're old, and I hate to break it to you, but some of you are. And I just want to celebrate that because if you're not, I mean, the alternative to being old is being with Jesus. So I guess, yeah, but I mean, it's okay to be old. I am old because here's the thing: age, age ain't nothing but a number. And like Indiana Jones said, it's not the years, it's the mileage. And I have a lot of mileage on this body, all right? And there's all sorts of ways that I started finding out I'm old. Now, I know you might be sitting there today thinking, am I old? Well, I have a test for you. Look at this picture. If you can, I wish you could see the look on Kenley's face right now, all right? If you know what the connection is between, number one, if you know what that one rectangle thing is, or number two, if you know what the connection is between a pin and that rectangle, then I hate to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, you, like me, we are old because we were born in the 1900s. Say it like that, the 1900s, all right? All of us. If we're feeling like this. Now, there's other ways. I didn't need this test to tell me I was old. I figured it out on my own. You want to know how? Number one, I can no longer tell the difference between different musicians. I still have problems separating one from the other, except I now definitely know who Kendrick is and who Drake is. I find myself more and more watching cat videos on Facebook because they're hilarious, but only old people watch cat videos. You should because they're funny. But I have not yet started sharing Minion memes. So when I start sharing Minion memes, come and do an intervention for me. The other way I knew that I was old is every time I played. Now, I got to preface this because looking at me now, you're thinking, well, yeah, that makes sense. But I did play football in college. At one point, I was an athlete in my life. And then I played baseball in high school, so I enjoyed playing softball. But as I played softball, it never failed. I got hurt. And it was the dumbest injuries, like I tweaked my hip flexor. I didn't know what a hip flexor was. I never once had an injury playing football in college, but I tweaked my hip flexor. And then the last time I played, just over a decade ago, I go to play a grounder, and I tore the muscle in my calf. And so this was right before a trip to Disney. And so now I'm walking around Disney in a big boot, holding up everybody. And my wife looked at me and said, "You are never," and the Dana means never, playing softball again. But and we can laugh about those things, but the one way I've found out that I was maturing is this. On Christmas, I started looking forward more to my family members opening their gifts that I gave them versus me opening the gifts they gave me. Isn't that a sign of maturity? Now, don't get me wrong. I still love to get stuff. But giving is better than receiving, right? Hey, do you want to know who said that? Jesus, that's who said that. I bet some of you didn't even know that. You thought it was some Hallmark saying, no, Jesus laid it down since day one. It is more blessed to give than to receive. Now, if you are here today for the first time, I want to say welcome. Yes, I am this weird. And it could go one of two ways. You either pick the best day to come or the absolute worst day to come, because today we're going to be talking about every pastor's favorite topic, giving. Now, I want to just say, some pastors, they don't handle the giving talk very well. Some pastors get freaked out. Oh, I don't want to talk about money. That's weird. I don't want to talk about giving. If you've been here any length of time, you know I have no such problem talking about money and giving. Why? Because talking about money is biblical. That's why. Jesus talked about money. Paul talked about money in the New Testament, and Old Testament books like Nehemiah also talked about money. Now you're wondering, why are we talking about a book of old people like Nehemiah? Well, You heard that, right? Yeah, I know what it is. I was just playing. We spent all last year celebrating how old our church is, 200 years. And now we're working towards the future. And we're looking at Nehemiah to see what can we learn as we build towards the future. And before we start doing anything to the building, I want to make sure the church, you and me, us, the church, has a solid foundation. So we've been going through our membership covenant. All right, our membership. This is in the bulletin. If you have it, I encourage you to get it. If you don't worry. I'll talk about it. Nehemiah, we see this in Nehemiah 9:38. The people recommit themselves to God and to each other. And this is what they say. In view of all of this, we are making a binding agreement in writing, like signing a membership covenant, on a sealed document. And that's what I'm hoping we're going to do. Because I want us to recommit ourselves to God and to each other. Now, some of you are not members. This is a perfect time to join. Some of you have been attenders that have been coming here for over 2 years. What are you waiting on? Some of you are members who you were born in this church and you are definitely old, like Sean. All right? And Sean he's been a member his entire life, and he's going to re-sign this. We're all going to re-sign it, so nobody's losing their membership or whatever, but I want us to commit to each other. And I want you to go ahead and mark the calendar. It's an easy date to remember, 3/16. Why is that so important? Because that's your favorite Bible verse. March 16th is when we're going to have Covenant Sunday, and I'm going to challenge everybody who feels led by God to sign this and say, yes, I'm recommitting. Now, I'm not going to force you to because this is between you and God. But I am going to encourage you however I can. Now, we started looking at this last week. This, if you look on the back, what doesn't have the logo at the top, you can see it's broken up into 3 different sections. Last week, we talked about celebrate and connect. And today we're going to talk about contribute. And the reason it's set into 3 different sections is it is addressing our idols. Now, you don't know what idols are? Idols are anything, good or bad, that takes God's place as number 1 in your heart. It could be good or bad. Anything that supplants God as being number 1, that is an idol. Last week we talked about good idols. Today, we're going to talk about one of the bad idols. But if you weren't here last week, I encourage you to look on our YouTube channel and watch the Celebrate and Connect video. As we talked about a lot of good stuff. I feel like I was supposed to say something, but I totally forgot. You want to know why I forgot? Thank you. I'm old. That's right. That's right. See, you needed more proof. There is proof. All right, so let's get into the contribute session. Yeah, I talked about idols, right? I said that part. Yeah, okay. That's what I thought. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. So contribute covers giving and serving. Now, why? To challenge the number 1 idol in America. Self-centered materialism. Self-centered materialism. That's the number 1 idol every American has to deal with. And this is one of the bad idols from one of Paul's sin lists that we talked about last week. 2 Timothy 3, verse 2 says this, "For people will be lovers of self and lovers of money." Lovers of self, self-centered, lovers of money, materialism. Paul said from day 1, and we're just reiterating. And this is what's so shocking to me. We know that Jesus told us to serve others. That was his whole thing. He said, God, the Master, I came to serve, not to be served. And then he challenged his followers, you should also serve. We're called to serve, but yet we don't. Why? Because it's inconvenient. Let's just be real. It's inconvenient. We know that Jesus tells us that we should give. Jesus talked about money a lot. It's not the number one thing that Jesus talked about. I think I even said that wrongly one time. But he talked about it a lot. And he said, as I shared with you at the beginning, talking about why I'm old, it's better to give than to receive. We know Jesus said this, but yet we don't give sometimes. Why? Because it's my money. And I'm going to spend it on me. And so I thought it would be helpful today to set forth a brief, partial theology of giving. And I just want to be upfront. I alluded to it earlier. I'm going to say it one more time. Not every pastor, not every church has handled this the best in the past. Let's be real. You might have been burned by a church in the past. Maybe a church embezzled funds. Maybe church did this. If you grew up in the 80s like I did, you know that the American church got greedy with all the televangelists asking for money and stuff. So sometimes the church doesn't really have the best track record handling money. But I wanted to encourage you that don't let what people mess up distract you from what God has called us to do. Because throughout the Bible it's clear. Giving is what God expects, and giving is an act of worship. So let's build out this brief theology of giving. You say brief, you swear. Just keep in mind, I'm going to try to be brief as possible. I need to cover everything, make sure the subject's covered. But this could be a whole sermon series. There's so much because the Bible talks about giving so much. So number one, giving obeys God. It does. Giving obeys God. Look at Nehemiah 10. After the people recommit, they say two things. We're not going to marry unbelievers because that's going to lead to idolatry. That's what we talked about last week. And then the second thing they talk about is money. The whole rest of chapter 10 is about what they're going to do with their money. Look at this, verse 32. We will impose the following commands on ourselves. We're going to give 1/8 of an ounce of silver to God's house, so to the church. Verse 35, we will bring the first fruits of our land to give to God, to feed the priest and to feed the poor and the hungry. Verse 37, 1/10 of our produce belongs to the Levites, specifically the priests. So they're paying the priest's salary. It's money, money, money. And remember, they're an agricultural society, so yeah, they're talking about in crops, they're talking about livestock, but regardless, they're talking about we're going to give back to God. Why are they doing this? Because God told them to. What is it? What are they recommitting after this? They just read the law, the Torah. And throughout the Torah, God told them to give 10% to the Levites, to give 1/8 of an ounce, to give this to the tabernacle, and then to the temple, to God's house. Over and over again, God tells them to give. Why? Why? Did God need the money? Can you imagine? If he needed money, he wouldn't be God. So God didn't need the money, so why does he tell his people to give? To remind us that everything, including money, comes from him. It's not my money. It's not your money. It's God's money that he has blessed you with. Now, some of us have made better decisions than others. Let's just be real. But regardless, you made those better decisions for a variety of reasons. Maybe you even had a better job. But guess where all that came from? God. It wasn't you. I know that's kind of like, oh, yeah, but it is me. No, it really isn't. And I'm not just saying this. Look at Deuteronomy, the law. This is what Deuteronomy 8 says. You may say to yourself, my power and my own ability. That's the heartbeat of pride right there. By my might and for my glory. That's a heartbeat of pride. You may say to yourself, my power and my own ability have gained this wealth for me. But remember that the Lord your God gives you the power to gain wealth. This is the principle of stewardship. It should be an easy concept, but we have to learn it gradually. It's a lot like raising kids. If you have kids, you'll get this. Don't look at me, Mom. When they're really little, you give them whatever, right? Well, maybe not whatever, but you feed them, You maybe buy them a toy. That's when Christmas gets really fun, watching the kids open the stuff, and then they play with the paper in the box instead of the $100 toy you spent all night putting together. But you never expect the little kids to get that, right? You never expect the little kids to be like, Mom, I hope this isn't putting you into debt. Dad, I really hope that this doesn't, is causing your checkbook to... You never expect that little kid. But then, when they become teenagers, it changes, yeah? Because then suddenly as they're teenagers and you're having to feed them even more, and they're draining your bank account because they're so hungry they never stop eating, and they never gain weight either because they're all the metabolism. You're feeding them, your bank account's going dry, and then what do? They don't respect you. They don't say thank you. And then what do you say to your teenager? You start laying the law down and be like, hey, man, I got my bills and I got this and I get that. You better get yourself a job if you want a car. You want to get yourself a job if you need to get. And then suddenly you flip the switch and you're telling teenagers, hey, good luck. Bring me back some money. It's kind of, so you learn it gradually. And then as an adult, right or wrong, as an adult, you're on your own. Well, most of us. Some of us still live in our parents' basement, But most of you are on, and there's nothing wrong with that, all right, as long as you're saving money, all right? So, but I mean, you're on a job, you have your job, you're trying to balance your checkbook, you're trying to pay all your bills. Your parents might help you every once in a while if you get really in trouble, but you're expected to be on your own. That's how it is in spiritual growth too. If you are new to the faith, if this is your first time visiting a church, I don't expect you to give money. Because you don't understand that everything belongs to God. If you've only been a Christian for a couple of months, maybe even a year, because everybody progresses at different times as you mature spiritually. You might only be given a little bit here or a little bit there. You might bring stuff for the food pantry, but you never give actual money. You're still growing in your faith. You're still learning the principle of stewardship. But eventually, mature Christians... Eventually, you have got to wrap your head around that you're an adult now, you're on your own. All right? Eventually, God, your Father, wants you to understand that your money, your blessings is from Him, and He is inviting you to join Him in His mission. Because all that money, the silver, the livestock, the food, all of that was to advance the mission of God. And what's the mission of God? To share Jesus with a world that is lost and a world that is hurting. So it's an invitation to grow. And every one of us has the different parts on that journey. And I'm going to talk more about that in a little bit. But why do we give? Well, let's get to it. Number 2. Giving emulates God. You know the word emulate, it means alike. Why does a duck quack like a duck? Because it's a duck. If you're a follower of Jesus, why are you giving? Because Jesus gave. It's that simple. All right? 1 John tells us that God is a loving God, but He's also a giving God. Look at 1 John 3:16. Not John 3:16, 1 John 3:16. This is how we have come to know love, that Jesus gave His life for us. Verse 17, so because Jesus gave His life, what should we do? We should also lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. What's the implication? I've already said it. For us to love like Jesus, we have to give like Jesus. If you want to know where I got the word emulate from, look at Ephesians 5. Therefore, be imitators of God. Man, I should have put imitate. But I don't like imitate. All right, but therefore be imitators of God as dearly loved children. meaning you're going to act like you're going to be like your parents, right or wrong. There's certain characteristics of your parents that you also are going to have. Be imitators of God as dearly loved children, and do what? Walk in love as Christ also loved us, and give as Jesus gave himself for us. When we give, what are we doing? We are showing that lost and hurting world who God is. That God is not a selfish God that wants to take, but that God is a loving God who wants to give. Compare that to other religions. Other religions, their gods, even back then during the time of Nehemiah, the other pagan societies that we talked about last week, that they, the idolatry, their gods required the stuff because they took. But our God, the true God, the one God, he doesn't take, he gives. He gives. It's a huge difference. And when we demonstrate God's character to the world, we're doing something that is awesome as far as evangelism. We are being countercultural. Cultural. We're not doing what the culture's doing. All the fish of the culture are swimming that way, and we're the fish that are trying to jump up and go this way. Now, why is that important? Because when you're not going with everybody else, you stand out. And you say, well, that's a bad thing. No, it's not. Because when you stand out, you're like, hey, why are those people different? And then hopefully that will lead to the conversation where we say, hey, here's why I'm different, because of Jesus. I believe in Jesus. I believe Jesus called me to do this. And it can lead to a gospel-centered conversation. Our culture, the American culture, from the beginning really, because money and greed and everything is nothing new. But our American culture, since World War II especially, is all about the American dream. The American dream. What's the American dream? Well, you got to work hard so you can play hard, so you can spend all your money on yourself. All right, so you can have the yacht, you can have the beach house, you can have the jet skis at the lake, you can do this and this, you can have the boat you want, you can have the granite countertops in your kitchen. That's the American dream. You work hard so you can play hard so you can get more stuff. But here's the problem, just completely separate. I'm going to give you a free financial lesson. Completely separate from the biblical mandate. Here's the problem with that. We overspend. Because we get so obsessed wanting this stuff, we stop paying attention whether or not our bank account can handle it. And then, before you know it, you are drowning in debt. One of the greatest evils in American society is the credit card. Now, I'm not like, what's his name? The financial guy. I knew his name, I was joking. I'm not like Dave Ramsey, where I don't have, but I appreciate you helping out an old guy. I'm not like Dave Ramsey, where I say credit cards, evil, don't ever have credit cards. I'm not saying that. But I am saying spend within your means. Do not overspend and go into debt, because that is bad. Debt is bad. Save more than you spend, and then do it a long time, right? I just messed that up. All right, so anyway, let's get back to the Bible. That was my little quick, brief aside of financial planning. Anyway, debt is bad. All right, but it's that mindset of I'm going to work hard to play hard so I can get more stuff. And it leads to selfishness. And I want you to hear that this is nothing new. All right, there were some first century churches within the first generation of Jesus raising from the dead and going into heaven. First century churches that struggled to give appropriately. And you may think it was the poor churches. Because after all, the poor churches didn't have any money to give, right? No, the poor churches gave. The poor churches gave a lot. So what church didn't? One of the richest churches of the first century, the church at Corinth. Corinth was basically like America. in a lot of ways. It had a lot of money. Their church was super rich, but yet they struggled to give. Paul writes 1 Corinthians to address some moral issues. Then a year later, he has to do the sequel and write 2 Corinthians. And in 2 Corinthians, he spends 2 full chapters challenging that church who has all this money to actually use their money for the gospel. And it's kind of like America. America, the capital C church, the American church, we have so much money compared to our brothers and sisters around the world. Our brothers and sisters that are worship this morning in China and in Africa, in other places or in the Philippines, where they're just sitting in plastic chairs underneath the thing, and they don't have anything, but they are way more generous than the American capital C church. So this is nothing new. It's almost as if at CES, having more is toxic. Kind of reminds me of the wilderness. You know, when the Israelites are going around the wilderness, God gave them manna. He provided them the food. And what did he say? He said, just take what you need. Don't take the extra stuff, because the extra stuff's going to turn into poisonous stuff. Anyway, let's see what Paul says. He's challenging the church at Corinth to live in a manner worthy of the gospel. And his premise is John's premise. Look at 2 Corinthians 8:9. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. Though he was rich, for your sake he became poor, so that by his poverty you might become rich. Jesus, man, there's so much packed into this verse right here. You have the pre-incarnate Jesus as the King of heaven. He was rich. He stepped off the throne. He gave up the riches of heaven to live as a poor man in a backwards town. Why? So that we, in our poverty, might become rich, because our God is a giving God. The way of the gospel, the way of Jesus Christ, is instead of spending money on yourself, instead of spending all your money on stuff, you give your money to others. This is not just a great apologetic that helps us. This is not a great apologetic that helps other people, although it does. It also helps us. Do you realize that? Giving helps us. That's the third point. Giving changes us. How does it change us? We go from being self-centered, materialistic, selfish people to be generous, like our God, to sacrifice, to give to others so that they might experience blessings. Real quick. This is my story. You want to know the real reason I have no problem talking about money and giving in church? It's because money has always been one of my idols. Family is number one. I love my wife and son a lot. I talked about that last week. That's one of the good idols. I love my mom a lot. I love my family. That's probably my number one idol. My number two idol for my entire life has been money, has been greed. Because as an only child, I was spoiled. And even though my parents didn't make a lot of money, they made sure I had whatever I needed. No, not what I needed. Whatever I wanted. They gave me all the kinds of stuff, and love you, Mom. All right? But here's the thing. I became obsessed with stuff. I still struggle with this. You've already established this guy's weird. I'm also a dork. I love comic books. And to this day, I will still spend money on comic books. There are way too much money on comic books. Just ask my wife. She'll tell you, way too much money. And I struggle with this. I've always struggled that, no, I want this thing. But that's not what I should do. In college, before DVDs, there were these things called VHS tapes. And in college, I'm just a collector by nature, and I had all these movies, and so I had boxes of movies. So in college, people would come to my room and check out movies. They would. I didn't charge them. It was just me getting, hey, a little quid pro quo. You get this movie if I need something else, It was like, I was the movie guy, right? And I would go every Tuesday to Best Buy. Ooh, what's the new releases? Oh, I haven't seen this movie. I'll buy it anyway because it's on sale. Because if it's on sale, I'm saving money, right? No, I'm spending money on something I don't need, and then it would just sit there in plastic. And I was really convicted. And God blessed me with a wife to convict me. Because here's the thing. Marriage is not about happiness. That's another lie of an American society. No, I'm leading something good. God designed marriage not to make you happy. God designed marriage to let you grow spiritually. He did. That was his whole idea. Hey, let's take two people that are totally different, force them to live together 24/7, see what happens. And God brought Dana to me because she grew up in a household that was very different than my household. Her household, they stress financial responsibility. And her parents are sitting here today. And I'm trying not to look at them as I talk about this. I warned them. I didn't know you were coming this weekend. This is what I'm talking about. I got to give them a shout out. They did a great job teaching her about money. Now, her brother didn't pay attention, but she did. And then she taught me what they taught her about, not just financial stuff, about how to balance and how to plan, and not all those practical things. Yeah, they're accountants, of course. I'm talking about spiritually. Spiritually, I'm trying to lead my house. Newly married family, Christian. I'm trying to be the leader of my house. And I had this huge gaping blind spot where I wasn't giving appropriately. I would be that guy that if you need it, if we were adopting a kid for the Christmas Angel, yeah, I'll go buy something because that's cool. I get to go shop for something. Or I would be that guy that would just drop $5 when I had $5 in the box. I never planned. I never did this. And she challenged me in a good way. She said, that's not biblical. And you're trying to lead me and you can't even do this? I was like, you're right. And so it was, and I'm not saying it was fun. I'm not saying it was a challenging struggle, but I grew. And God used our marriage to help me grow. And he used some other spiritual mentors to help me understand that giving is an act of worship, that giving should be a priority. And the fact that giving was not a priority meant that I loved my stuff more than I loved my God. And so I started planning to give appropriately. And we had the debate, is it 10%? Is it pre-tax or post-tax? All these things is a net and gross, but we made plans and we started giving. And I'm telling you, my life completely turned around. And I started seeing everything differently. All those movies that I would start looking at and go to, I would stop buying them. Because I would go and I would look at the store and I'd be like, this movie's on sale, it costs $20. That would buy 4 Bibles to send to China that doesn't have Bibles. That's what I started running it through. I started running everything through the eternal calculation of what could God do with my money that's more useful than me having another thing that's going to sit on a shelf and collect dust. And God grew me in that way. And I have experienced so much joy since I've started giving appropriately. And God has come through so many times. Because you want to know how giving changes us? It builds your muscles. Now, I don't have muscles anymore. All right? Oh, yeah. I don't. Tony, stand up and flex your muscles. No, I'm just kidding. All right? But it's still, just like you're doing the curls for the girls, right? When you give, you're strengthening your faith muscles because you're never going to see God deliver and be faithful if you don't give sacrificially. And I know there are people sitting here today. I could go around. We could have an open mic time, and you would share your story about how you didn't know how you were going to make ends meet that month. But yet you still were convicted that I have to give to God first. And then, lo and behold, you get that check out of nowhere. That's even more than what you just gave. God will show up. God will be faithful because he says he'll be faithful, but you've got to step out on faith to let him show up. This is how Paul starts chapter 8 of 2 Corinthians. This is how we're going to wrap up. He's talking about the Macedonian church. The Macedonian church was poor, and he's writing to the Corinthian church that was rich. And this is what he says. During a severe trial brought about by affliction, their abundant joy, they had joy during affliction, and their extreme poverty, they were poor, overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. I can testify, Paul, I can testify that according to their ability, even beyond their ability, of their own accord, saying Paul didn't force them to do this. He didn't ask them to do this. He didn't preach a sermon about giving. On their own accord, look what they did. They begged us for the opportunity to give to the mission of God. Why? Because joy. I know it's counterintuitive. I know it doesn't make sense. But abundant joy. That's what they want to do. Because they understood what they had gotten from God. And they knew that they should give back to God. When you give, you're proving to yourself that you love God more than you love your stuff. Because Hebrews 10:23 says this, he who is promised is faithful. And like I said, he is also faithful to provide. And if you never give sacrificially, if you never step out and take that chance, then you'll never see him provide in a mighty way. You're playing it safe. Christianity is not safe. Jesus is not safe. And if today has made you uncomfortable, good. Because that's not me that's making you uncomfortable. That's the Holy Spirit that's making you uncomfortable. And the Holy Spirit is whispering right now, what do you love the most? And so I just want to challenge you to start praying anew, to ask God, what are you calling me to do? How are you calling me to serve? What are you calling me to give? And I have to wrap this up because I want you to decide this. Please do not give because you think, don't give just so God can give you back to you, okay? And please give because I'm telling you to give. That's the wrong reason. Because look at 2 Corinthians 9:7. Each person should give as they have decided in their hearts, not reluctantly or out of compulsion, because God loves a cheerful giver. And as you pray for God to show you how you should be giving, I want you to consider the verses on either side of this. Look at verse 6. The person who sows sparingly, who gives a little, will reap sparingly. And the person who sows generously will reap generously. When it comes to money, I alluded to this during the praise report. Too many of us, our view of God is too small. It just is. And when it comes to money, the trap we fall into is not that we expect too much from God. It's that we expect too little. Second Corinthians 9:8. And God is able to make every grace overflow to you, so that in every way, always having everything you need, you may excel in every good work. We give because God gave. Let's pray.